Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 180. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_ on Twitter, joined by my co-host, John White, at BJourneyman. Hey, John, how's it going?
Hey, Nick, I'm doing great. Just want to remind everybody that we are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations, and that we hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Our DMs are open. Is that what the kids say?
Wide open.
That means something, and I actually don't know what it means. I guess you could close your DMs. I've learned something just in this discussion right here. But yeah, we would like that feedback. Would love to hear from you. And ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to career enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Awesome, John. I feel like today is a day of new beginnings. Isn't this the start of something new, or have I just had too much coffee?
No, you're correct. This is the beginning of a new series. We interviewed Bill Kindle, and we're not quite sure if it's going to be 2 or 3 episodes as of right now. We're betting on 3 because apparently that's our new normal. But yeah, Bill was just a fascinating guy to talk to, and had some really interesting things to say. I would say the early mention of tinkering, like that's another pattern that I'm starting to recognize. You know, people who like to tinker, and if you don't have that instinct, it's something that can be learned. You know, you just learn and shed the fear of breaking things. Anything that you liked that you want to tease a little bit here?
There's actually a great story about how Bill got one of his first jobs in a customer service-oriented business and the experience he had there. So I would listen for that one, because that, I think, shaped his attitude down the road and made him who he is today in a lot of ways.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, I don't want to ruin anything else, so let's get to the first of, call it 3 episodes with Bill Kindle. Bill Kindle, welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast.
Hi, Nick. Hi, John.
Hey, can you tell us who you are, introduce yourself, and then maybe what is it you do right now?
All right. Well, name's Bill Kindle. I am a cybersecurity engineer right now. Been in IT for a little over 20 years. Done a little bit of everything.
It's funny, a lot of us get tagged with that jack of all trades early on in our careers. Can you kind of tell us how you got into the technology industry? Maybe how you got exposed to, IT in the first place, or computers?
A long time ago, actually it wasn't really all that long ago, when I was a young teenager, started playing around on my aunt and uncle's Hewlett-Packard computer that they had. It's running Windows 95. Learned how to play NASCAR. I don't know if you ever played that one or not, but it's a super old game and the graphics are terrible. But for that time, it was state of the art. But so I played that a little bit. Then I got introduced to Mario Teaches Typing, which was pretty cool. And I started kind of playing around with that.
Wait, did you say Mario Teaches Typing?
Mario Teaches Typing. You can actually find that game on some of the old internet archives for the old DOS emulators.
How did I not know about this? Wow.
Yeah, look it up sometimes. It's actually kind of fun.
It's not Mavis Beacon.
Oh, no.
But
no.
Mario.
Mario
Okay.
Teaches Typing. Yep. It's pretty awesome. But I did that for, a few years and just kind of got generally curious and started doing, a little bit of, I guess, basic web design when I was in beginning of high school, and spent some of my study hall time on a computer that was in the classroom, just kind of, pounding away at a keyboard, looking up stuff on the internet and just tinkering. That same aunt and uncle that had the Hewlett-Packard computer kind of took notice that I was into that kind of stuff. I talked my aunt into buying me my first How to Build a PC computer book from, I believe it was Office Depot, somewhere around the time I was 14 or 15, and saved up some money that I had from a paper route. Literally, that I had a paper route at that time when people still bought newspapers. Just kind of bought some computer parts online and just slapped it together, reading instructions in that book, and been doing that kind of stuff ever since. So people found out that I could do that stuff and paid me money to come and take viruses off their computer. Getting $30-40 as a 16-year-old is actually a lot of money. And people would just hand it over to you. And all you did was spend 10 minutes removing whatever virus of the week was out there and running disk cleanup on their systems. So I actually made quite a bit of money in my early teens, and a lot of it went straight into the gas tank. So I kind of got the idea one day after talking to my grandparents and my mom, and they said, "Oh, why don't you go to school for that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of like that, and talked to a guidance counselor in my high school, and they introduced me to the trade schools that were in the area, and went and took a tour of a trade school in Bellefontaine, Ohio. They had some really cool programs, and I did that for 2 years, my last 2 years of high school. I did vocational school for information systems and computer networking. So it just kind of came easy. I wasn't a dumb student by any means, but I did pretty well there. I actually did better at the vocational school than I did at my high school that I left. So after doing that for a couple of years, like I said, IT stuff was just kind of coming naturally to me, and I got talked into joining a bunch of friends to go to the now defunct ITT Technical Institute in Dayton, Ohio. So that's where I got my associate's degree.
Was the vocational school like a work study type deal?
No, it was actually like a high school, they called it a career center, but it's basically a JVS, joint vocational school.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, you go there and you learn trades while you're going in high school. And I'm a huge proponent of vocational schooling. I think every high school in America should be a vocational school, because college might not be for everybody, but it doesn't mean you can't learn a skill. And, there are lots of trades out there that need skilled people. And even if you don't make it a career, just the fact that you know how to do it, can make or break a person early in their career in any field. And that's kind of where, it landed me with IT. I came out of high school knowing quite a bit about computer networks and stuff like that. And it wasn't terribly hard for me to find a job doing some of that, or even doing work on the side for people. It was fairly easy. So, but I'm very, very, grateful that I had those conversations early on with but starting with my grandparents and, my mom and that guidance counselor I had, that really kind of just put me on that right track. It hasn't let me down yet.
So there's a lesson here, and this really resonates with me, Bill, because I've seen so many posts lately in different Reddit forums from high school students who don't know what they want to do. They're frustrated that they can't decide, and usually the advice I end up giving is go and get some experience in something.
Yeah.
You need to figure out if that's what you like to do or even interested in.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to do a couple of different jobs before you find out what you don't want to do. And, I've had friends of mine that, they went through construction trades. They learned how to lay bricks. They learned how to, stud a wall, skills that I wish I had. I've contemplated at times going back to school just to learn that kind of stuff. It's just that whole vocational experience was like one of the turning points early in my career, was just having that experience and getting that kind of interaction. It was priceless. That's why I said huge proponent of vocational schools. I recommend every high school student check those out.
I mean, I think there's a massive lesson there, right? Just like Nick, I think we've had this discussion before. I see, technology trades very closely and much more closely associated with the apprentice system. If you wanted to become an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter, right? It's you need to kind of connect with somebody who can show you the ropes, who can give you a series of tasks to kind of get introduced to those skills, and then, work your way up. Before you can become a master electrician, you have to be an apprentice electrician. And, that's kind of the joke with my name on Twitter is the V Journeyman, right? So I never have claimed to be a master because there's no system like that in what we actually do. But, there's people I think are ignoring a bunch of schools that in trades that don't necessarily have the cachet of, computer programmer or, doctor or lawyer or accountant, but are certainly the keys to a very middle class lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can earn six figures being a nurse, for example, and people don't seem to realize that. Same thing, you can tickle six figures as an electrician or as a carpenter. You just have to know the industry, pretty well and make good decisions about the type of specialty you join. But, very, very possible. So kudos to that piece of advice.
And that's one thing I really like about the whole vocational school experience I had, was just that the fact that it was there, and it started with somebody telling me about it. When I got done with that, or got into it, it was around 2000, 2001. I graduated in 2003. And I can tell you from what I learned back in those days to now, I mean, there's been so much technological change since it. I mean, there's stuff that I learned in my trade school program that is completely irrelevant now. And that's way IT, as you go through longer and longer in your career, you find out that, a lot of the stuff that you learn and pick up on, if it's not something that's like the absolute fundamentals, it fades away. It quickly becomes irrelevant. And I guess you have to be kind of okay with that. And that was one thing that, I learned early on, is that I had to be okay with constantly learning. And about every 5 years or so, I have seen, some pretty massive shifts in things,
I like that. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned, that your grandparents and your aunt and uncle encouraged you to get started somewhere because they saw you had an interest that you wanted to develop, and they invested time and encouragement in you. You can't overlook this portion of family support, even at a young age, for what potential career paths could be. So if you're listening to this and you have kids, really for kids at any age, Bill, you have kids. I have a daughter who's about to be a teenager. John, you're about to have children of your own. And it's important for all of us to be mindful of what our kids are interested in and what we might be able to help them figure out about themselves and what they could do with the skills that they already have. I think that one is hitting me harder and harder as I spend more time on Reddit, as we talk to more people on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, you got to take interest in other people at sometimes. And that's, John, you mentioned you are wanting to see like this trade, like our industry become more of like a trade skill. And I've had those feelings for a very long time myself. And I guess that's, kind of segueing into a book. You guys have had Don Jones on the program before, right? With the,
oh yeah,
some of his books. And one of the most influential books I've read that, kind of hit me real hard. And I was like, wow, somebody else, actually gets this too, was the Be the Master book. That whole series and every iteration of it is something that I recommend to everybody pick up and read, especially if you're in the IT field, because there's so much truth in some of the stories in it that you can kind of juxtapose with what we do every day. And it really is. I mean, as time goes on, I've come to realize that you got to take an interest in people. You do that by, trying to help them along, teaching, doing that kind of stuff. And that's what I wish that hopefully by the time, if I ever get around to retiring, that, I actually see that shift where you're not seeing a bunch of people just hoarding knowledge, but you're seeing everybody share everything. And I hope to get to that point someday where I can be like, I'm not that good at this and you are so much better. Here you go. Congratulations. I'm going to go take a breather. So
I totally get it. I mean, you've kind of, touched on a couple things right throughout this. Like, one is kind of the foundational skill is to always be learning, and people who, hold on to like the one piece of expertise that they have and, just hope that like the world doesn't change around them. Like that's just not going to work. Right. If at a certain point in time, that I just remember like the key to printing money was to be like a netware, like certified technician. And if like that is what you held on to, you're nowhere right now. That just doesn't exist as a marketable skill, right? But for a long time, it was the marketable skill. And you just have to be constantly willing to learn new things. And you can't hold on to any one thing. And then you said, as you pointed out, like that push into like giving back. Like none of us got where we are without, people giving us a hand up and paying attention and giving us a push forward. That might be like one of the reasons that we founded this podcast, to be honest, is like there's other ways forward, and we just need to give people exposure for like the paths, that they've taken. Because certainly my path was not linear. And, when I was, 16 or 17 years old, the only path that I saw was a linear path, right? It's like graduate high school, to go to college to get a degree in something, and then go to work for a company and practice that thing that I got a degree in. And almost anything else was like failure. And that's just not true. Like, my career has been just totally nonlinear. In that vein, like, what was the next step for you coming out of, ITT tech? Like, what possibilities did you see there? And then what path did you actually take?
I got out of high school and was all, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, man, the world is my oyster. I'm going to conquer it. And then reality set in, and it was like, no. Nobody wants to hire an IT person straight out of high school, no matter if they had really strong grades and had provable skills. They're just like, no, you don't have certifications. So I settled on working at Walmart while I was in high school and mostly through college too. I saw that there was a new Walmart supercenter not far from where I lived that was starting to be built. And I was like, you know what? I always liked shopping at Walmart when I was a kid because, it just was the store I was always at. So I was like, why not go work there? It's better than Kmart. So sorry for anybody that worked at Kmart out there, but Walmart.
It's okay. I worked at Walmart too.
So, hey, we got something in common.
Yeah.
I once parked at a Walmart, so
yeah,
kind of the same thing.
Yeah, almost. The whole story behind that kind of starts off with I'm going out applying for jobs, and I go to the local Walmart store that was already in place, but they were going to be closing it because they were building this new store. This probably was, I want to say 2002. They still had paper applications, so I got in there and I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a job here. And I walked up, I filled out one application, put it in, didn't hear anything back because they were actively hiring for it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to really flood the system here. Walked back in and I got 25 paper applications, because they just had them stacked, laying there in a pretty huge pile. And I just kind of nonchalant walked in, grabbed just a fistful of them. It just so happened they'd be, 25. Walked out with them, and I sat for an entire afternoon at my house filling out each one of those by hand. So I had like a little system. I'd fill out my name, first name on each one of them. I'd go back, fill out the last name on each one of them, just line by line. I was a teenager. I didn't have anything else going on. So, had all.
Were these identical applications or were they each different?
No, they were identical applications. That's why I was going through them and just form filling them really fast.
Okay.
Like I was like a meat puppet line printer. So I just, went through all of them and took me a couple hours and got them all completed, packed them up, went back up the next day, dropped off 26 applications. And a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call, and it was a lady on the other end of the line. She's like, I'm so-and-so from Walmart, and I would like to bring you in for an interview. Show up at this place and time, and you're going to be like in with a bunch of other people. I was like, oh, okay. So they were doing like a mass hiring event, interviews and everything, because it was a brand new super center. They needed like 300 or 400 employees. So I get up there and, I'm waiting. There's a bunch of other people and, my name gets called. They bring me over to do an interview, and the lady that interviewed me just so happened she was the second in charge of the store. They already had like a store manager, but she was like what they called the co-manager. She looked at me, had all 26 applications stacked right there in front of her. And she's like, for a gentleman as young as you who took the time to fill out 26 applications, she's like, I would not be able to live with myself not having called you. And I was like, well, thank you. I was like, it worked. That lady was a real nice lady. I actually worked with her for about 3 years. Great respect. I learned a lot of retail stuff from her. It was awesome. I did my 3 years there, learned a lot about people, got to see a lot of weird stuff. Customer service is a lost art to a lot of people. Thankfully, I had management that, they drilled that in every single day. You got to have good customer service management. You got to have good customer service. Just, whatever you got to do, take care of the customer. That's what you do. The managers empowered everybody from, the janitor all the way up to themselves. They empowered their people to make decisions. And that's one thing that always kind of stood out to me. It's like, as a sales floor associate, I was given carte blanche on a lot of stuff that, like if I felt I needed to do it, they're like, you just do it, make a judgment call and do it. It wasn't too often that I had management in my career that was like that. It was pretty rare, but I'd always knew that I didn't really want to stay there. They actually had me at one time pegged for, management training program. I interviewed for that, didn't get accepted, but I kept trying to do like Walmart IT. I was like, yeah, if I can get into that, that'd be really cool. And again, this is back in 2004, early 2005. I was just always kind of interested in it because I knew it's like, Walmart was the, leading retailer in logistics, and they owed a lot of their logistics might to, their use of computer systems. And I was like, if I could really get into that, that'd be cool. Tried that. It didn't really go anywhere. eventually I started getting kind of disillusioned with it. I was just like, I'm not going to go anywhere here. Can't get into management, can't get into IT. I'm going to look for greener pastures. Some stuff came up and I was able to actually leave Walmart, and I did a short-term internship for the former vocational school that I used to work at, or used to go to school to, I should say. Took that opportunity because it was more money, and put in my 2 weeks notice and left.
That's cool. So it sounds like you had a vision of what you wanted to do. You knew it wasn't going to be, even when you walked in the door at Walmart, like that's not where you wanted to stay. You realized that, you needed either progress or leave. And progression came in a certain number of routes. And when you realized that that wasn't going to happen, you knew that you had to, it was like door 3, like leave.
Right? I always joke, it's like, I could only sell so many HP computers in a box and Linksys routers and tell people how to set them up before I got bored with it. So there was a few occasions where people like, hey, could you come hook this up for me at home? And I'm like, hey, come back after 4:00 and we'll talk. And they would show up after 4:00 and be like, you still interested in making some side money? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not on the clock now. So sure. That's again, going back to the whole thing where people used to hand me checks, from an early age, like just to fix computer problems. I moonlighted a little bit. I'm not ashamed of it. Yeah. When you get $7.50 an hour and you get to do IT work on the side, you're like, man, I'll do some IT work. So retail stuff's for the birds. Like I said, the opportunity came up to go work at my former vocational school as an intern, and I took it.
How about those customer service skills and the transferability into the internship and beyond? Because I imagine that as impactful as it sounds like that was from your management to take care of the customer, how did you take that forward?
Well, like I said, all my customer service skills that I learned early on, I owe it to my time at Walmart. The managers they had at the time were very people-oriented and very dedicated to that fact. They did whatever they went above and beyond all the time, and they instilled that in everybody. And, that, like I said, it's the one thing that kind of always stuck out to me. And I still try to make it a point today when I'm helping people, I try to remember that. I'm like, I'm not some tech elitist, that has secret knowledge. I'm there because I have a certain set of skills and can apply them, and I can help somebody. So that's what I do. If they've got a question, I try to go out of my way at times to, help them out. I would say that everybody in IT, no matter what level you're at in your career, or even just getting started, it would really be beneficial to do some type of work where you had to deal with individuals on a regular basis for a little while, because you'll learn so much about people, and what makes them happy, what makes them mad. And it's not so much, like learning how to like read facial expressions or listen to people's tones. It's listening to their problem and trying to help them resolve that problem. There's some days you can't resolve some problems because, there's some people you just can't help, but you learn to recognize that. You'll see that, there's a lot of people out there that genuinely need help. And there's, the occasional person that'll come along that, just wants to be a jerk and all they can do is complain. They don't really want a resolution. They just want to be, just to yell or whatever. And in a way, that's kind of something else you got to learn to do too. Sometimes it's not personal. It comes down to something simple. Like they just want to be heard. They just need somebody's ear, and you might be the unfortunate one to have to lend that ear for a little bit. So, working retail, I say, is like one of those, it almost should be a rite of passage for IT people. Just work retail for a month, a couple weeks, just do it a little bit, and you'll thank yourself later on, especially if you have to deal with a lot of people. So, because I still haven't found that IT position where you can go into a cave and not come out for a little while without talking to somebody. I'm sure they exist, but it's got to be a miserable existence. It's not something I would strive to want to do.
It's so fascinating. It fits in with something my wife actually pointed out to me, which was, it was an article about the hidden cost of emotional labor. And, emotional labor is like the stuff that people expect above and beyond like the actual thing that they're paying for. Right. So you might pay for somebody to like tell you something, but the fact that they're friendly while they're doing it and smiling at you and making you feel heard is the thing that they expect above and beyond, right? That's the emotional labor. And unless you've ever been paid to do that. Like, I'm sure that, bartenders have to do that. Servers in restaurants have to like provide that emotional labor, unless that's ever been part of your job description, like implicitly or explicitly, you don't understand the value of that. And unless you've been doing it, you don't understand the labor part of that.
Yeah, I've always found that always falls under other duties as assigned.
I was thinking the same thing.
It's the catch-all, and usually when you see that, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be dealing with people problems. So, like I said, that kind of like molded and shaped my early on my career. Is that, you have to be willing to help people and take care of them in IT, and that's what I've always tried to do. Went on to work a couple months at that vocational school. Won't go down into the nitty-gritty details, but it was the only job I've ever been fired from. I kind of got taken out one day, and they're like, hey, you need to go see the superintendent of this school, and we're going to have a little chat. And I was like, oh, okay. Go in there, and I'm promptly informed that I'm being fired and that the school board's been notified of my firing, and that there's nothing I can do because the school board pretty much, blah, blah, blah. All I remember is I blanked out at that point, and I just said, well, I guess I quit. And I walked out while being yelled at by the superintendent. So there was a laundry list of stuff that was listed out that was reasons for me being let go. And I was like, oh, none of this stuff was ever brought up to me. And okay, thanks for giving me a chance to rectify these issues that I didn't know I had. So I walked away from that job with, a real sour taste. I mean, it was a pretty decent paying job. It was my first IT job, so I felt like an absolute failure, being let go from that for what I felt were some pretty petty reasons. Kind of sulked around for a couple weeks, and my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, still my girlfriend. She kind of kicked me in the rear and said, if you want me to stick around, you need to find a job. So I even flirted around with the idea of working for the railroad. Like, I actually signed up for a conductor training course with a Class 1 railroad. Actually got a phone call from them one day saying, hey, we want to bring you down to McDonough, Georgia for about 6 weeks. You're going to be making like $300 a week, but we pay for your hotel and everything else like that while you complete conductor training. I was like, sweet. This was like my secondary career choice. I'll go work on trains. Hung the phone up with that lady, and it was like 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from a little shop in Dayton, Ohio that wanted me to come in for an interview. They said they got my name from a former director at ITT whose son worked there at one point in time, and he had a tendency to feed this shop recent graduates. We're in December of 2005, and I'm like, yeah, I'll go down there. So I went down there, interviewed with my first pretty good boss, and got hired on the spot right then and there. So I was literally days away from either continuing my IT career or working for a Class 1 railroad.
Systems engineer, railroad engineer.
Engineer. I was going to be an engineer of some sort. So one way
and
or
it
another.
didn't even take 26 applications this time.
No, it didn't. I packed up and got ready to do that. It took me about, 2, maybe 3 weeks of driving back and forth from Dayton, where I live, to there to basically say, I'm not doing this every day. I'm going to move down there. Worked for that gentleman for about 3 years. Did pretty much all kinds of like really interesting work. I like to think of this as my actual first real IT job and not the internship with the school, for many reasons, because I learned so much in such a short period of time there, because they were like a little mini MSP. So you hear a lot of people talk about, you go work for an MSP, you drink from the fire hose. It's not a joke. I started off doing basically what they called bench technician. So people brought their computers in, I repaired them, cleaned them out. I learned just how dirty computers can get. But I did that for about a month, got handed a set of car keys one day, and they're like, hey, you've been promoted. You are now a network technician. I was like, oh yeah, what do we do that? And they're like, here's a tool bag, and you're going to go pull some cable, and also you're going to do PMs on computers and servers. I was like, oh, sweet. Finally, real IT work. I pulled a lot of cable, put a lot of patch panels in, just did all kinds of like really interesting work. I learned about digital video surveillance systems, how to do physical security with camera systems, which that was a skill that actually paid off a couple of times over. I wanted to like do more in the business. I, had kind of the hopes and dreams. I was like, I kind of like this MSP kind of gig. I would like to open up my own location and help expand the business. And, I started having some serious conversations with the owner at the time. I was like, I wouldn't mind moving back closer to home, why don't you let me open an office up that way and see if I can make a go at it? Got told, well, we're not really in the financial position to do that just yet. Maybe someday, but just not right now. And me not being the one that can really take a no like that for too long, I was just like, okay, I'm going to go find something else then. And this was like right around the 2007 when housing market started kind of fluctuating. So people were starting to get a little bit antsy about things, about spending money. I actually got a job with Goodwill Easter Seals in Miami Valley, which to this day is probably the best job I've had.
It was interesting, that transition mirroring, and like it seems like you learned that same lesson. Like, hey, it was great to make this transition to network engineer and be out in the field and learning new skills and pulling cable and installing new and different types of equipment, getting over to the networking side of things, from like the computer technician part. But then realizing, oh, I need to keep on moving up. And again, like if I can't, then it's door 3. I'm moving out.
Time became, apparent that, I wasn't going to really go any further with this company. Couldn't really make any more money. Started looking around and noticed that there was a IT support engineer position that was opening up with the local nonprofit Goodwill. They needed some help with a bunch of retail locations, plus doing like internal support for all their nonprofit programs that they ran. And I applied for that, met a gentleman at a coffee shop, had a little conversation. Again, got hired on the spot. So I turned in my notice at the other job and left and started working for the nonprofit. And like I said, that was one of the best moves I think I ever made. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things. Like I think this was like the period of my career where I started like maturing as an adult, seeing, how, others way less fortunate than I was by leaps and bounds, how they still had like an immense work ethic. It's something that kind of irks me when I run across somebody that doesn't have work ethic, because they come up with all kinds of excuses like, well, I can't do it because of, this problem, that problem. I'm like, you haven't seen problems until you see somebody with severe MS or still manage to hang clothes up on a daily basis and be thankful that they're able to do that. My time there, like I said, was just eye-opening every day. I enjoyed it. I didn't make a lot of money while I was there, but the experience of it was something that I still cherish to this day. Would even consider going back there if they ever would have me back.
Had you done work for any nonprofits similar to that when you were at the managed service provider, or no?
Myself personally, I don't know if the business did work, but myself personally, I didn't get to like go to a lot of those places. There was like, I think 1 or 2 churches I went to do like wireless networking or, do a computer move, stuff like that, but not anything on the scale that I did it at Goodwill. I learned a lot about the challenges that nonprofits have with just getting funding. Learned a lot of things that you can do as a nonprofit. There's not really an excuse that you can't get stuff. It's just you got to know where to go look. And looking's like, can be somewhat of a challenge, but it's doable. And, I saw that a lot when I worked there. Now, I know it might not be that way with every nonprofit, but the size of their organization might have had a little bit of pull too. I don't know. I did learn to do IT on shoestring budgets there. We did our best to take care of I want to say it was around 27 retail locations, point of sale kiosks, which I had a little bit of experience with at Walmart. Because I actually helped store setup crews do some of the moves for that stuff. But I went to multiple places throughout their retail chain, did everything from like I said, the cash registers, putting in the point of sale computers, getting all that connectivity taken care of. They did not have security cameras at these stores. So I actually worked hand in hand with the loss prevention manager at the time, and we got security cameras in every single one of the stores, and I was an integral part of doing that. And kind of as a thank you to my previous boss, I kind of made that connection with them and said, hey, if you want to do deal with a local company, because that's one thing they wanted to do. I was like, call my former employer up and they'll get you all the stuff. I was like, you don't have to have them install it because I know how to install it. Just go buy this equipment from them. Turned out really nice. My former boss actually ended up thanking me for it. So it was one of the bigger sales he had. And last to my knowledge, his now security business, I think, is still doing business for him. So
the personal connection you had back to your former boss. When we talk about connections, a lot of times joining a community gives us a bridge to make a ton of new connections. And with the use of the Spiceworks software, at some point you got exposed to the Spiceworks community. Can you tell us a little bit about your participation in that?
I didn't learn about the forum part until I was working at Goodwill. I was doing basic internet searches, for different problems I was coming up with, and I kept coming across, there's Spiceworks in the Google searches. So I was like, well, it must be a pretty popular site. So yeah, it was just kind of like going through and just, looking at some of the people there and following along like, oh, okay, I have that same problem. And, oh, there's a fix for it. Oh, cool. That's a novel idea. I'll try that. Or maybe I'll put my own spin on that because I can take a little bit of information from this post, and then I can piecemeal my own solution together. And early on, I remember that's one thing I found that was really useful about it, was just that, there was just a lot of knowledge there. So I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I couldn't really find a lot of like good forums at that point in time, but Spiceworks was one of them that kept coming back up time and time again. But going back to making the connections and everything, yeah, it's interesting choice of words there. Yeah, it's networking was all over in that job. If I wasn't troubleshooting physical connections, I was making personal connections with people. And that was one thing I really liked about that job, was just that, I could take care of somebody's problem, and, that actually might help them solve somebody else's problem or few people's problems, and those problems could have been, somebody that, made some bad choices early in life, but they were trying to get, back on the right track, and they were in a program, to get basically job experience and make something of themselves. And, they had people that were employees that, were helping those kinds of folks. And, if their technology didn't work and they couldn't connect to, some sites, like even just a simple job search site, it had a ripple effect. It didn't just affect the user, it affected everybody else that depended on that service. And that was one thing that, it really hit home with me working there, was that, my work mattered. And that's something that I didn't feel in the previous two jobs, was that my work mattered. That's something that today, like, is still like on one of my top, needs out of a job. I have to feel like my work matters, because as soon as I don't feel like it matters, I just can't do it anymore. Maybe that's a personal flaw. I don't know. I like it because, if the work matters, you do your best work. I felt like I went every day and tried to do my best work there. But, it kind of got to the point where, again, financial reasons, career reasons, I just couldn't go any further. They had a very structured system. They had somebody that was already entrenched in the like management role, and they weren't going anywhere. So do I attempt to work my way into that, or do I just avoid all the politicking altogether and search elsewhere? Well, that's when an opportunity arose to get out of the nonprofit space and potentially be the first full-time employee for another small MSP. Like, when I say small, they literally had like 3 contracts. But I was going to be their first full-time employee that they were hiring, because they did not want to employ contractors anymore. They explicitly expressed, some dissatisfaction with the quality of contractors they were getting. And they figured, well, if we hire a full-time employee, it'll be better for us. The pitch sounded really good. I made a really good impression with them. They, again, hired me on the spot and basically said, you're going to be kind of a manager. And I was like, okay, cool. This is some career progression, right? But it was kind of one of those manager and name only kind of things. No real teeth to it. I did learn an awful lot there. I got really self-sufficient, and this is where I started PowerShelling. Because when you work for another school and you have 500-600 students at a time that, are cycling in and out, that's a lot of Active Directory user accounts to create. So, admissions would give us a spreadsheet, and they're like, do something with these. We need them done by next week when courses start. Got to work. I was like, I remember this thing called PowerShell, and I hear it's pretty cool now, because by this time I think it was hitting, version 3, I think is when it was started, because this would have been like server 2012. I was like, I'm going to give this a shot. So I started getting into doing it with PowerShell, mostly because I was digging through some files one day, and somebody asked me, they're like, why are you doing with PowerShell? We already have a batch file for that. I was like, ooh, a batch file. So I get it out, and I start looking at the documentation for this, and they wrote the whole thing in VB script, executed the VB script with a batch file. And I was like, trying to make heads or tails. I was like, okay, I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing everything the same way in PowerShell. And it was frustrating, because the folks that were doing it were so entrenched into continuing to use this VB script, because that's all they knew. So I spent a lot of time like going through just like learning PowerShell and getting good at it, and even just like some basic things. And finally had some success with it, and had a PowerShell script that I would run once every couple of weeks. They would have some new students coming in or students coming out, And I would just run this PowerShell script to create student accounts or go through and purge other accounts. Because I think they had a policy at the time where it's like, they still kept an Active Directory account for students if they wanted to come back and audit classes. We're talking like tens of thousands of AD accounts that were at this one location, just because they kept, a couple of years worth. Finally, they like changed the policy where we actually started purging. Like if they didn't log in within the last year, we just purged their account. And if they came back and wanted to do it, we just remade their account. So, but I started doing all that with PowerShell. That job kind of petered out after about a year. I went through and, was having some discussions with them, trying to get them, to expand the business a little bit. They didn't have any interest in doing that. And then it also became very apparent that my gamble of taking a job with no health insurance had ramifications. And my wife at the time was in the final stages of nursing school. The nursing school basically said, if you don't have health insurance, you cannot complete the coursework. You couldn't go through and do clinicals, I think. She had to have full health insurance prior to doing clinicals. And she didn't have it, would have been on my insurance. She was dedicated all of her time, strictly to being an RN and getting through those courses. And, I trying to be supportive of her as much as I could. Had to make the decision. I was like, well, okay, well, I can't stay here. You guys can't get me health insurance, and I can't afford it because you guys aren't paying me enough to afford it outright. I said, I'm sorry. I want to keep working for you guys, but I have obligations. And it just so happened that a friend of mine that I used to work back at Walmart, so we're going back to connections again from long ago. A good friend of mine who just happened to live down there now said, hey, I'm leaving this engineering job out of northern Cincinnati. He's like, they need IT people bad. Like they need somebody that knows what they're doing. He's like, that used to be me and I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm leaving. He's like, because I'm an engineer. So he's like, I know how to build things. He's like, I don't know how to, make computers work, contrary to popular belief, but he's like, you should give him a call. I was like, well, hey, it just so happens I'm looking and I'm desperate. So again, I don't know what it is. I got on the phone with them again, hired on the spot, like right there on the phone. I was like, okay,
that is
cool.
Awesome.
I'll come in, yeah, it does. That was the last time that happened. It hasn't happened on the first try since. So I went there and got acquainted with the network. And it was my first experience with a multinational company. They had their main offices were in the UK. They had a small office that used to be quite large, but it was obviously downsized over the years. So I was like one of 4 people in a small office in Cincinnati. And that job was a good job. Don't get me wrong. It was boring. The first 2 months I was there, I pretty much solved every problem they had, IT related. And basically it was replace equipment and get an Active Directory domain stood up. They literally everything was on Solaris. Or if it was actually something with like, a bug in the software, I had access to developers in the UK that I just basically would send an email to and say, hey, call me in the morning, because by the time we were already getting those emails here, they were already off working in the pub. So I'd have a full day of, time in between waiting for a support call. So in those bored hours, I started getting on Spiceworks quite a bit. That's how I spent some of my days. Like I'd get my work done in the first hour or two during the day, and then I'd have nothing to do for the rest of the afternoon. It was the first job I ever had where I actually had my own office, 4 walls, a door, and a small window looking out into the hall. I had good benefits. Pay wasn't terrible. It was definitely a job that could have been done 100% remote. I even tried to lobby for that one time, and they were like, no, we got to have you in the office. And I'm like, there's not really a reason to have an office here, to be honest. I was like, everything here could be.
But do you?
I was like, do you really need an office here? Like, what's the real reason for that? But, they needed it here because of like regulatory reasons. So that's another reason. But anyways, it was a good job. I had some really good people that I worked there with, working with the other half of the IT, main company's IT in the UK. I knew that gentleman was getting ready to retire. So I was like, oh, opportunity. I can become IT manager for multinational company. Sweet. So I approached the owner of the company and I was like, hey, I've already got familiarity with everything. I'd like to, apply for that job. And he's like, oh yeah. Well, I'll be over the US office, in a couple weeks, we'll talk about it then. So, I waited, came over. We had a discussion and he told me like, oh yeah, we'll talk. We'll continue this discussion, keep talking about it. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I felt really good about it because I was like, man, I've already got the end. I've got at least, almost 3 years here. And, I've done all these projects really good. I've came under budget. I upgraded a bunch of technology here without like any issues. Get told like later on, they're like, oh yeah, we already had somebody hired over here. And I felt immediately like I was lied to. They came here and told me to my face that they hadn't hired anybody for this position. And then he gets back and then they tell me this now. Like, why? Again, it was one of those things like, why couldn't you tell me that to my face? Like, I'm an adult. I'm a big boy. I got my big boy pants on. Just tell me, you know? And I felt disrespected at that point. And I was like, I can't do this. I don't feel like my work's valued, and I got to go. So I started, my wife and I had been talking. She was ending her time as in nursing school, and she'd been working full time as a nurse now for at least a year or two. Like I said, I was about in my third year with them. I was like, I'm going to start putting feelers out there. And we had talked and said she wanted to move home, and, been down that way for 9 years. We're like, it's time to go home. If we want to start a family, it might be better to be closer to family. So I looked high and low for different jobs and happened to come across one for a multinational identity company out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. I applied for the job and got a call back from a recruiter. And I was like, oh, that was really fast. And the recruiter's talking, he's talking up this company like really good. Like probably by far one of the best recruiting calls I've ever had was from this company. This recruiter, calls me up and he's like, just out of curiosity, like what you want to be doing? I was like, well, I said, I'd really like to be like kind of running my own, section of IT. Like, I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be managing people, but I said, I want to feel like my work is valued and actually has some meaning. I said, cause I'm kind of bored right now, so it's not a bad job. It's just, I'm not really doing a whole lot of IT. I'm doing more help desk work a lot than what I want to be doing. And he's like, okay, well, you tell me how much you're making a year. And I made this dumb mistake. I told him exactly what I was making, forgot to fudge the numbers on that. And he's like, oh, well, I think we can beat that by 10K. He's like, will that work for you? I was like, well, certainly it will work. So I got like an instant 10K bump, got to move home. And that's where I spent the next 5 years.
I don't know that that's the wrong thing to do. I think you need to know what it is that you need to make.
Yeah.
Right. To make the move. And a lot of times it's like, it's a 15% raise just because you're walking away from your network and your institutional knowledge. Yeah. I think that's like the general guidance. So I don't think that's wrong.
Yeah.
It also sounded like you knew the answers to the questions that you were being asked, right? Like, what is it that you want to do? Well, I want to be valued. I want to do work that I find valuable. I want to be respected. Those are things that are, I think, people, sometimes it takes a long time for them to figure out, like, oh, there's actually these things that I need. And it's a difficult thing to be able to answer. So for you to have those answers is pretty impressive. Ooh, hate to drop in there right at that moment, Nick, but we're going to break it off and split it, like I said, probably into 2 or 3 episodes. That last job transition that kind of re-triggered me, listening to that again, just having that idea of being in a situation where your employer is being dishonest in a job discussion, like that just is, what a horrible feeling that was. Or even if it was like, at the best, like just talking to somebody about their career and like making promises and then just forgetting and not following through. Like, and that's the best way that you could think about that situation. Really rough.
Yeah, and in those types of situations, you feel like your work doesn't matter. And Bill said that he really needs to feel like his work matters in order to be happy at an organization. And I think a lot of us would agree with that. If you felt like you were doing something and no one found value in it, that's one of the 3 signs of a miserable job that Patrick Lencioni talked about in his book. That's all I could think about when I heard that statement.
It's very true. Very, very true. And I think something that I always appreciate is when somebody talks about, unconsciously or consciously, like understanding what it is that they need. Like that's like that's tough in and of itself, right? but then understanding what you're missing and then actually acting to bridge that gap. That's just super, super impressive. It's a, takeaway that I'll have to write down.
So should we tag that with self-gap analysis or something like that?
Yeah, if somebody could help us, just coin a new phrase there, something super catchy.
Yeah.
That would be great.
I'm going with self-gap analysis.
Self-gap analysis sounds odd, but okay.
We'll come up with something.
Yeah.
I feel like Bill had this constant drive to advance and improve himself, and that's kind of the reason he was able to come to those conclusions. Like, I want to get better. I want to make this business better. He even talked to one of the employers about trying to expand the business, and they weren't ready for that, but he was already thinking about it.
Yeah. It's interesting when you have those things like burning in you, when something in your past has ignited that drive to improve. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's ambition. There's a number of things that it can be a combination of a bunch of different things, but to be able to like harness it and not just wallow in anxiety, that's super impressive. Really enjoyed just seeing the results of where Bill's gotten, falling through the journey, I suppose, at this point.
And he had a great reputation amongst people who knew him, and that got him a job. So you never know what that personal connection with someone might do for you down the road.
Absolutely. And then also cultivating that personal brand, right? So it's not just that people know you, but they, think positively of you and are willing to advocate for you, when you're not there. That's kind of an amazing thing to accomplish. Yet another amazing thing.
Right. And I'm sure you heard the book recommendation, another Don Jones recommendation here to read Own Your Tech Career. If you haven't read that one, that's a great one to get a copy of. Don't forget.
Yeah. Man, I really feel like we should talk to Don Jones.
You know what? I feel like we may have already.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
We owned that one. Actually, he owned that one. That's why we have guests, so they can own the stage and give the great advice.
Yep. Yeah. No, that was a terrific conversation, and I highly recommend people go back and listen to that too. If somebody like Bill endorses Don, then it must be good, right?
Yeah. What is that? Episodes 138 and 139? That's just me.
It's been a while.
That's me shooting off the cuff.
137, 138.
Oh, okay. It's close.
But it's pretty amazing that you can do that off the cuff, though.
Every now and then. Well, John, I think that's it for that segment and all the topics we had planned. Anything else pop into your mind?
Nope. That's it. Just a reminder that we'd like people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_. For John White at VJourneyman, signing off.
Adios.